In this installment of Only in Japan, we're going to look at a Game Boy game from 1992 that never made it to Western shores. The awkwardly translated, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls. It's gained a very small cult following in the English-speaking world thanks to its main characters making cameos in a couple of Nintendo's games over the years, with players drawn to the game's sense of humor and irresistible charm. The game's music shares both of these qualities, composed by one of the greatest of Nintendo's roster, Kazumi Totaka. Totaka is the real-life KK Slider, the man responsible for dozens of great soundtracks, as well as the most memed music in Nintendo's history. Even knowing how phenomenal Totaka's work is, I was still blown away by just how many different robust and delicate musical pictures he managed to paint in The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls within the limited capabilities of the Game Boy soundchip. The music feels mature beyond what you'd expect from a Game Boy game, with quite a few pieces that I would consider truly powerful. Of course, I want to talk about the game's irresistible melodies, but today I also want to take a look at Totaka's approach to the accompanying voices in this soundtrack, as I think that's where a lot of the magic lies in this music. Like the NES, the Game Boy soundchip could only handle 3 voices at once, and with one track constantly taken up by beautiful melody, that left only 2 voices for support. It's very impressive what Totaka managed to accomplish with these limitations, and it's clear that he has an expert-level understanding of voice leading and how melodic lines work, as we'll see shortly. But first, let's dive into what makes the melody writing in the soundtrack so strong. To understand a lot of the melodic choices made in the game, we have to look at what I'll call the bell theme. The ringing of the game's titular bells produces this 6-note pattern. Which vaguely evokes the sound of that classic school bell chime. It features 3 pairs of fifths, a downward leap of a fifth, then up a step to another downward leap of a fifth, and then up a step to a final upward leap of a fifth. We almost always see it played out as starting on the 5th of a major key, making a 5-1-2-5-6-3 pattern that establishes the tonal center clearly and colorfully. This bell theme is a huge part of the game's soundtrack, used in tons of different pieces throughout the game, including the track whose melody I want to analyze in detail, The Prince's Adventure. The tune starts with an introduction, immediately drawing us in with this rising repeated melodic figure over a colorful chord progression. Pay attention to the rhythm of this first melodic figure as well as the bar that closes out the intro melody. And enjoy this little syncopated bell theme quote at the very end that brings us into the main theme. This was just the intro, but already you're excited to go on an adventure, aren't you? And we've already established several ideas that will play key parts in the rest of the tune. First, these harmonic moves. This F to G over F move, where a major triad moves up a whole step while keeping the bass note the same underneath, is a core part of this track's harmonic identity that we'll see a lot moving forward, especially when that movement is followed up with a minor 7 chord a half step below. I go into this type of chord progression in more detail in my video on Baka Mitai, so go check that out if you're interested. But we're supposed to be talking about melody here. As we move into the track's main theme, you'll no doubt be taken immediately by how strong the initial melodic statement is. The rhythm is strong and intentional, and we see both of the rhythmic ideas I pointed out in the intro used as part of this main theme. The melody is also perfectly structured to create a sense of purpose and storytelling. We start with a clear outline of a G major arpeggio, our tonic chord, that seamlessly resolves down to an A note with this decorated figure in bar 2. We've moved away from our tonic G major to a non-chord tone, the second, setting up a desire to return back home in future. The answering phrase starts on this second, decorates it with a figure based on our introductory melody, and then resolves with a leap down to the 5th, a chord tone of G major. Being the 5th though, this resolution doesn't feel quite so final. Being a chord tone of both the 1 chord, our place of rest, and the 5 chord, our primary place of tension, gives the 5th scale degree a special one foot in both camps kind of quality. We're leaving the door open for more melodic development. And that is exactly what we get with the following 4 bars, which gives us a nice drawn-out statement of our classic bell theme over a big 2-5-1 back to G. I love how the accompaniment figure that plays beneath this bell theme is a repeated pair of fifths, the first 4 notes of the same bell theme. It's like a little bell theme fractal for these 4 bars. Now, this melody is so strong you could probably repeat these 8 bars on loop forever and not mind, but the piece is nice enough to give us a B section for contrast as well. This section takes the decorated embellishment melody figure we saw in the second bar of the main theme and expands upon it, moving the figure around to decorate first an A note, then down to a G, then up to a C, and down to a B flat. This dancing melodic figure is harmonized with the same major chord to major chord up a step over the same bass note move. I've got to think of a cooler name for that. With this C moving to a D over C before dipping down to a B minor 7. These 2 bars jump up a minor third, shifting from the key of G to the key of B flat before jumping up another minor third to hit this G flat major 7 chord that leads us back to our home key by way of the following F7 sus to D7 sus. Breaking it apart, we can see the motifs that get moved around and reused, but until I took a serious look at them, I hadn't really thought of that at all. The melody just feels so perfectly natural. Using a couple small musical ideas to create something that feels so natural, so conversational, is a high-level accomplishment. The key changes in this B section are pretty distant from our home key, but they also don't feel unnatural or out of place, and this brings us to our next point about Totaka's writing. His ability to use voice leading is unmatched. Notice how the last 2 notes of melody before each key shift carry over completely to the following chord in the new key. These G and D notes over our G over B chord stay completely still to become the 3rd and 7th of the following E flat major 7 chord, and the B flat and F notes over this G minor 7 chord fit perfectly with the following G flat major 7. And for the following F7 sus and D7 sus chords, notice how the melody falls perfectly to resolve naturally on the 5th of each chord as the chords shift. It's actually a pretty weird chord progression, but the voice leading almost makes it feel obvious. In truth, this is all relatively simple voice leading though, and we can find things of a much higher level on this same soundtrack. See, trying to write for the Game Boy, it would be tempting to use one of the voices at your disposal to quickly arpeggiate through the chords in a progression. That way you can have one voice handling the melody, one voice on bass, and one voice handling the chords. Totaka does use this technique several times throughout the soundtrack, my favorite of which being the Port Saltwater theme with its simple 4-bar loop moving from E flat minor to G flat major 7 and D flat add 2 over F chords. You can see why he opted to go the arpeggiation route here, giving us such a beautiful chord progression. And what a clever way to stretch out that bell theme into a longer melodic statement. This loop never gets old for me. But there are also plenty of times where Totaka will pass on spelling out harmony explicitly, instead dedicating the 2 voices underneath the melody to a harmonized counterline that implies chord changes without giving us any concrete chords. He does this by understanding typical voice leading structures and progressions to give us the bare minimum we need for the music to make harmonic sense. In the music for Spring Hill, for example, we get a variation on the bell theme melody that plants us firmly in the key of E flat all by itself. The 2 other voices harmonize this syncopated rhythm, enforcing that E flat major tonality but in a very unorthodox way. Instead of giving us the root and 3rd, or root and 5th, or even the 3rd and 5th of the tonic chord, these 2 voices move between the 2nd and 3rd of the key, and the 2nd and 4th of the key. On its own, it's tough to know what to make of this, but with the melody on top so clearly expressing an E flat major sound, We hear this as a colorful E-flat add 2 chord. The third moving to the fourth and back is a key part of the voice leading found in our classic 5-7-1 cadence, a move that strongly creates a sense of resolving to E-flat major, and you can imagine how just one extra bass note underneath all this could create a very clear B-flat 7 to E-flat progression under the melody. But by giving us just this one small piece of that cadence, Totaka manages to evoke some of that harmonic motion without showing his whole hand. The following phrase outlines a minor 4-1 cadence in a similarly vague way. Once again, we start with the second and third of our A-flat minor chord used as the harmonization, creating these two beats where the melody is underscored with this semitone crunch. It's only in the second half of the bar that the second, this B-flat, resolves down to the A-flat root, making it more clear what this chord is supposed to be. The melody in this bar gives us a flat 6 to 5 movement, with this C-flat at the end moving down a half step to resolve to B-flat in bar 4. This is the most important part of the minor 4-1 cadence. It's this note motion, this voice leading, that makes the minor 4-1 sound the way it does. An A-flat and C-flat moving to an F and G is not exactly a textbook example of a minor 4-1 cadence, but working with the melody, all the voice leading is in place to get the effect of that particular cadence. And this is all without mentioning that we've effectively played an A-flat minor 6-9 chord to an E-flat add 2 chord with just 3 single voices. This is peak efficiency in harmony. There's another aspect to the way Totaka uses voice leading that makes this soundtrack really special. There are times where the music will meander through a long series of unusual chord changes, movements that don't point in any specific direction for an unusually long phrase. These moments leave us stranded as a listener, not sure where we're going or when we'll arrive, but the alien harmonic movements are undoubtedly strangely beautiful. These odd chord shifts only work thanks to the careful approach to voice leading that Totaka takes to weave each chord into the next. Mandola's theme is a perfect example of this. The piece splits the 3 voices into melody, harmony, and bass roles, with the harmony voice quickly alternating between 2 notes for each chord, functionally creating a series of 3-note chords to accompany the melody. And if you thought the chords Totaka could spell out of just 2 notes were rich, you just wait and see what we got coming here. We start on a D minor chord with an added 4th, with the melody establishing the rhythmic pattern that it will follow for almost the whole piece. We then move immediately to a B minor over D chord, which is not a very common move to say the least, and immediately destroys our sense of what our home key really is. From here on out, the melody uses the same technique above each chord, called an appoggiatura, where a note that makes sense and is part of the underlying chord is delayed in favor of a tenser note above it, which then resolves to the target note, in this case, on the and of beat 2 or 4. This technique places a colorful, dissonant note on the strong beat of each chord change, a very classical way to create melodic drama. And then this larger figure is just shifted up and down a scale as we go through the piece until the very last couple of bars. Knowing this is what's happening, we can use the notes being resolved to help inform our understanding of what's happening in the harmony without getting confused by the eccentric notes found on the beat. Take a listen first, and then I'll try and break down what's happening here. To break down the entire progression, we have a D minor add 4 to B minor over D, and then an F sharp 7 over E, which makes sense coming after a B minor chord. But then we move to an F diminished 7 that moves to this enigma of a chord, G, A sharp, B, D, and an F sharp melody note on top. If we ignore that melody note and take the F natural it resolves to as the chord tone, like I mentioned earlier, you could see all of these notes as being drawn from the F diminished scale and just being a walk up from the previous chord, but that F sharp on top is a really weird choice for a tense note here. It kind of looks like a G major 7 sharp 9, which is truly bizarre. Clearly this chord was not arrived at by thinking harmonically, but by looking at the voice leading on an individual note by note level. Anyways, moving on, we have an F sharp minor over A that moves to an A minor 6, and then an F-sharp 7 augmented chord that resolves down to a D minor over F to A major 7 over E progression to finish off the loop and lead back to the D minor add 4 chord at the top. This final D minor to A move could have set up the opening D minor really clearly, but this G sharp in the melody rather than a G natural keeps this from being that obvious A7 to D minor 5-to-1 cadence that you'd expect if you were thinking harmonically. This G sharp does pull up chromatically to the A melody note that kicks off the piece, and so again thinking on an individual line basis, we can see the logic at play. It's just such a weird series of moves one after the other from what we're used to. This music was clearly born out of handling each voice individually and worrying about what all the pieces added up to later. Both the melody and bass line are just moving up and down a scale, and if you look at the harmony voice as two independent lines, you can see how each one moves smoothly from one bar to the next. Each line makes sense on its own, and added all together it creates such a strange, beautiful combination. One last example of the same effect can be found in the track Reunion, which opens with a figure from the Mandola theme melody playing out over an E bass pedal, while the inner voices trade off between our tonic E minor and a pair of diminished 7 chords, F diminished 7 over this E bass pedal, which adds together to look like an E7 flat 9 chord, and an A diminished chord to close out the intro. The following B7 sus chord that sets up the main melody gives us this little flat 6 to 5 trill to let us know that we're in dark minor territory, and then we get a sparse and careful statement of our bell theme. Okay, like, how does he do that? How does he make the exact same theme sound so cheery and upbeat in one piece and so heartbreaking in another, without hardly changing anything about it? I can't unravel the entire magic of this piece, but I can catch a couple of the reasons why it sounds the way it does. Notice how the accompaniment here is giving us the root and third of our tonic E minor this time. No substituted seconds or moving voices around to the surrounding notes. I think it's because the melody here is starting on the 11th and jumping down to the flat 7th. And for these to sound like extensions of E minor and not just imply a different key altogether, the E minor tonality has to be really solid underneath. Notice too how solid the B7 to E minor voice leading is here. We get the 3rd and 7th of our B7 chord resolving up to the root and down to the flat 3rd of our E minor chord. This is a textbook 5-7-to-1 cadence, couldn't be more clear. The end of the track moves away from our tonic E minor into another strange, meandering series of chords like we saw in Mandola's theme. Like in the tune's intro, we see diminished chords used to move between descending D minor, C major, and A minor chords. The odd length of phrase here combined with the unstable diminished harmony again keeps us guessing where we're going to end up and when we're going to end up there, but when we finally do land in an A minor tonality and this statement of the bell theme rings out, we get the sudden uplifting effect. The way the 16th note accompaniment expertly voice leads its way to this A minor chord and then snaps back into an 8th note accompaniment pattern feels a bit like the sun breaking through the clouds, and the subsequent walk up from A minor to G over B to C sharp half diminished has such a positive, upward building energy. This kind of motion heavily sets up a big 5 chord, D7, that would resolve us to a triumphant G major tonic. But instead of that, we jump to a dissonant F-sharp chord decorated with the flat 9th and flat 13th to bring us crashing back down to earth. It's such a short piece, but it has such a dramatic arc to it. It has highs, it has lows, it sets expectations and then gives you a twist. This is a really powerful piece of music and a great showcase to the kinds of musical achievements you can make with the limited hardware in the right hands. I honestly could go through probably every single piece of music in the game and find something interesting to say about it, but I'll have to wrap it up here for today. Go check out my bonus bit, available for patrons of the channel, for a few extra thoughts and observations. And go listen to the Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls soundtrack. It's really something special. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.